My daughter-in-law blocked me on social media. I thought she just wanted some space. But then my friend told me she saw my photos online. Photos I never shared. I searched and found an account using my name, my face, and my house. The bio said, "Rest in peace, mother-in-law." My hands went cold. And when I opened her latest post, my heart stopped. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. Hello, friends. My name is Grace. I'm 58 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. For most of my life, I believed in family more than anything. I thought love and loyalty were things that stayed no matter what. I raised my only son, Daniel, after my husband passed away from a heart attack when Daniel was still in college. I worked as a librarian, saved every penny, and did everything I could to help him build a stable life. When Daniel met Megan, I was happy for him. She was beautiful, charming, and had this way of making everyone feel seen. At least that's what I thought in the beginning. They got married 2 years later, and I remember standing in that small church, feeling proud and emotional, thinking maybe finally my son's life had turned the corner. After the wedding, they moved into my house temporarily until they could buy their own. I thought it would be a few months, maybe a year, but time kept passing and I started to feel like I was a guest in my own home. Megan changed slowly, not all at once. She stopped greeting me in the mornings, stopped eating the meals I cooked, and began suggesting that Daniel and I needed space. I ignored it at first, telling myself it was normal adjustment. But one day I overheard her whispering to Daniel in the kitchen, saying I was controlling, that I was living through him, that I couldn't let him go. Those words cut deep. From then on, the energy in the house shifted. Daniel became distant, always on his phone, always defending her. I tried to keep peace, baking pies, making small talks, pretending everything was fine, but it was like walking on glass. Then one day, without warning, Megan told me they'd found a new apartment and would move out by the end of the week. I smiled and said I understood, but when I closed my bedroom door that night, I cried silently into my pillow. The house felt empty after they left. I missed the noise, even the tension. I still called Daniel every week. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't, but I never pushed. A few months later, I noticed Megan had blocked me on Facebook and Instagram. I thought maybe she needed space. Maybe I'd done something unknowingly to upset her. I decided to respect it. Life went on quietly. I spent my evenings reading, tending my small garden, and talking to my neighbor, Linda, until one afternoon, Linda came over holding her phone, looking pale. She said, "Grace, I think someone is using your name online." I frowned and took her phone. My breath froze. It was an Instagram account with my name, my photo, even my living room in the background. But the bio said, "Rest in peace, mother-in-law." I felt my pulse rise. The posts were edited versions of my old pictures, some from Daniel's wedding, some from family gatherings. The captions were strange, like someone pretending to be me from the afterlife, writing things like, "I forgive those who hurt me," or "My soul is finally free." It was sickening. My first thought was that someone had hacked me, but then I noticed the account followed only one person, Megan. My stomach twisted. I searched her profile, and that's when I saw she'd been posting selfies with Daniel in my house, in my garden, with captions like "New beginnings" and "Peace at last." One post had a candle with the words, "Sometimes you have to bury the past to breathe again." I couldn't move. My hands went cold, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to call Daniel right then, but something in me said, wait. I decided to dig deeper. I created a new account and followed Megan's fake one, watching silently as she posted more, tagging people from our neighborhood, making it look like I had died. Neighbors began commenting condolences, some even saying how kind I had been. I felt invisible, erased, like I was being buried alive. For 3 nights, I couldn't sleep, staring at my ceiling, wondering how far she would go. Why would she do this? What did she want? My mind kept returning to the way she smiled, when people praised her, the way she craved attention. Then I noticed one post that made my blood run cold. It was a video of my house from across the street filmed at night with the caption, "I still feel her presence." That meant someone had been outside my home. I started locking every door, keeping the curtains drawn, feeling eyes on me even when I was alone. Something darker was happening and I needed to find out the truth before it was too late. But what I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning and that the truth waiting ahead would be far more cruel than I ever imagined. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts tangled like threads that refused to untie. And every time I closed my eyes, that fake account haunted me, the words "rest in peace, mother-in-law" echoing in my mind like a curse. I kept asking myself what kind of person could do something so cruel and why. The next morning I made myself coffee, but my hands trembled so much I spilled half of it on the counter. I knew I had to find out the truth, but I didn't know where to start, so I called my old friend Linda again and asked her to help me take screenshots of everything before Megan could delete them. We spent the afternoon saving every post, every caption, every comment, and by evening I had a small folder on my laptop filled with evidence that something evil was happening. Still, I didn't have the courage to confront anyone yet. I was afraid Daniel would believe her instead of me, afraid that if I accused Megan without proof, I'd lose my son completely. So I decided to stay quiet and watch Tang Lo with my son completely. So that if I accused Megan without proof, I'd lose my son completely. So I decided to stay quiet and watch. A few days later, I noticed something strange. Megan had posted a photo of a new car parked in my driveway, but that car wasn't mine. I hadn't seen it before. It made me wonder if she had been coming near my home when I wasn't there, or maybe she had a spare key. Daniel never returned. Fear crept under my skin like cold water. I started checking my doors twice, keeping a small bat near my bed. One evening, as I watered the flowers in my backyard, I felt someone watching me. I turned around quickly, but no one was there, only the wind rustling through the trees. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. I went back inside and locked every window. That night, I heard footsteps on the porch, faint but clear. I held my breath, clutching my phone, waiting, but whoever it was disappeared before I could look. The next morning, I found footprints near the back gate, small ones, probably a woman's shoes. That's when I decided I couldn't just sit anymore. I drove to the police station with the folder I'd made and showed the officer the account, the pictures, the fake obituary. But he shrugged and said it might just be a prank or a misunderstanding. My voice shook as I tried to explain that this wasn't just about social media, that someone was pretending I was dead. But he only told me to block the account and report it to the platform. When I walked out of that building, I felt smaller than I had in years, like nobody believed me, not even the people supposed to protect us. On my way home, I passed by Daniel's office. I sat in the car for a few minutes, debating whether to go in, but my heart said no now because I already knew his reaction. He would tell me I was overreacting, that Megan would never do something like that. Still, something inside me whispered that the only way to win was to stay quiet and let her expose herself. The next few weeks, I watched from a distance as the fake account kept growing. People started tagging Megan under my posts, writing things like, "You were such a strong daughter-in-law." But she played the perfect grieving woman, posting black and white photos, lighting candles, even writing long captions about loss and forgiveness. It was almost cinematic the way she performed her own little tragedy. But one night she made a mistake. She uploaded a photo of herself standing next to my mailbox, my house number clearly visible, pretending it was an old memory. She wrote, "Sometimes I still visit where she lived. Miss you always, mother." And I realized she wasn't even afraid anymore. She wanted me to see it, to know she was rewriting my story while I was still alive. I felt a fire light up inside me, not of anger, but a purpose. She wanted me erased, but I would make her face the ghost she created. The next day, I called an old friend named Robert, who used to work in insurance investigations. I told him everything. He came by that evening with a notebook, calm and patient, listening carefully. A story. I told him everything. He came by that evening with a notebook, calm and patient, listening carefully. And I told him everything. He came by that evening with a notebook, calm and patient. When I showed him the account, his expression hardened. He said, Grace, this isn't just harassment. This looks like identity manipulation, maybe even fraud. He told me that if someone had reported me dead, officially it could be tied to life insurance or property transfers. That sentence hit me like lightning. I ran to my filing cabinet and pulled out all my papers, times, my home deed, insurance policies, my late husband's documents. Everything seemed normal until Robert pointed to a letter that had been mailed to me weeks ago, unopened. I tore it open, and inside was a notice about an insurance claim being processed under my name, stating that the beneficiary was Daniel, my son. I froze. My legs gave out. I sat on the floor clutching the letter. Robert gently took it from my hands and said softly, Grace, this isn't your son. This is her. She's doing this under his name, maybe even forged his signature. My chest felt heavy. I wanted to scream, cry, collapse, collapse. 11 is 9, 9, 10, tour Persti. But instead, I took a deep breath and said quietly, then we'll find a way to stop her. That night, I sat by my window watching the streetlights flicker, and I promised myself that if she wanted a ghost, I would give her one, but not the kind she expected. I would make her believe her game was working, while quietly pulling every thread of her lie until she had nothing left but her own reflection. And when she finally looked in the mirror, she would see the truth staring back, alive and unbroken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning in bed, thinking about Megan's face when she saw me at the door. She looked guilty and like a child caught stealing cookies. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but my heart whispered otherwise. In the morning, I made coffee and sat by the window watching the rain fall over the garden that used to bloom with roses. Now it looked tired, much like me. I picked up my phone and opened the fake account again, the same one that used my name and pictures. I started scrolling through its posts. Every single one felt like a knife because each photo was from my home, from moments I thought were private. Some showed my backyard, my knitting basket, even the old rocking chair on the porch I used every evening. I whispered to myself, how could anyone have taken these? I zoomed into one of the photos and saw something that made my chest tighten, a small reflection on the window behind me. It looked like a phone being held up. I went cold. Someone was in my house taking pictures of me without me knowing. I remembered Megan had access to the house. She used to live here before moving in with her husband last year. She still had the spare key she never returned. Maybe I should have changed the locks, but I trusted her. She was my daughter. How could I have thought she would use that trust against me? That day, I pretended everything was fine. I baked her favorite cookies and texted her to come over for tea. She replied with a cheerful yes. I set the table and waited. When she arrived, she hugged me lightly. Her perfume filled the air. Too strong, too new. I poured tea and smiled, asking about her work and her life. She talked fast, avoiding my eyes. Then I asked about her phone. She froze for a second, then smiled and said, why are you asking, Mom? I said, oh, nothing. Just wanted to see the new model. I heard it has a great camera. She laughed, but her fingers tightened around the cup. I watched her closely. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. When she left that evening, I went to her car quietly, pretending to forget something, Ray, and slipped my small tracking device under her bumper. It was something my late husband had once used for safety reasons. I didn't plan to use it for revenge, but life had other ideas. Over the next few days, I watched her movements through the tracker. She went to work as usual, but one afternoon I saw something strange. She stopped near the cemetery by Maplewood Park, the same place where the fake account had posted photos of gravestones with my name edited on them. My heart pounded as I drove there the next day. I parked at a distance and waited, hiding behind tall oaks. I saw Megan standing with a man in a black hoodie. They were talking in low voices. She handed him something that looked like a small envelope. Hi. He nodded and walked away. She stood there for a moment, staring at a gravestone, then left. I waited until she was gone and walked closer. When I reached the spot, my legs felt weak. On the stone, someone had placed fresh flowers and a small note that read, "Bine gone forever." My name was written on it. I stood there in silence, feeling the world spin around me. The rain started again, washing the ink off the paper. I picked it up with shaking hands and whispered, "Why, Megan?" That night, I sat in my chair, staring at the door, waiting for her to call to say it was a mistake, a joke, something harmless, but she didn't. Only silence filled the house. The fake account posted again, this time a picture of my mailbox with the caption, "Soon." I realized I wasn't just being humiliated, I was being erased. And to whoever Megan was working with, had something darker in mind. I promised myself that night I wouldn't cry anymore. I would find out the truth. And when I did, they would regret ever thinking I was weak. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The air outside was heavy with mist. And for a moment, I felt like the house was holding its breath with me. I made my coffee and stood near the hallway, looking at the door of Megan's old bedroom. I hadn't entered that room since she left after her wedding. I walked closer, turned the knob slowly, and pushed it open. The scent of her old perfume still lingered in the air, mixed with dust and silence. Her posters were still on the wall, a few books stacked on the shelf, and a half-broken mirror leaned near the window. I walked in and ran my fingers along the dresser, and that's when I noticed something strange. The small jewelry box she had left behind was slightly open, and inside, instead of earrings, I found a folded piece of paper. It looked recent, not something that had been sitting there for years. I unfolded it and saw a printed receipt from a photo print shop in Denver, dated 2 weeks ago. The list mentioned 20 digital prints, was one large canvas and a custom portrait. My heart began to race because I hadn't printed any photos recently. I called the number on the receipt pretending to be Megan, and the man on the phone said the order was ready for pickup yesterday. He asked if I wanted to collect it today. My hands trembled as I said yes, I'll be there soon. I drove to Denver that afternoon, the entire ride filled with questions that twisted in my chest. When I reached the shop, the clerk looked confused when I gave Megan's name, but after checking, he handed me a flat box. I took it to my car, closed the door, and opened it carefully. Inside were printed photos of me. Some were taken from across the street, some through my windows, and one was so close it showed the reflection of my living room light in my eyes. I felt sick. Among the photos was a large printed canvas wrapped in paper. I opened it slowly and froze. It was a fake funeral poster with my face on it. The words "Rest in Peace," Grace, carved in black letters. My body went numb. I looked at her. My own daughter-in-law had paid money to create my death. I drove back home with tears rolling down my face, but my mind was clear. This was no misunderstanding anymore. It was cruelty dressed as play. She wanted people to think I was dead, maybe to take over my house or destroy my name. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, listening to the creaks of the old walls, and made a plan. I knew I couldn't go to the police yet, not without proof that connected her directly. I decided to dig deeper. I opened her social media and created a fake profile of a local friend, pretending to be someone interested in her work. Over the next few days, I watched what she liked, who she followed, and one account kept showing up. A man named Kyle posting strange, dark quotes about control and endings. I followed him quietly, and soon I noticed he was posting photos taken near my neighborhood too. One night, he posted a blurry image of my porch light with the caption, "Almost ready." The next evening, I waited inside with my camera near the window. Hours passed until I saw a shadow moving near the porch. I held my breath and clicked a picture through the curtain. The flash caught him off guard and he ran. I ran to the door, but he was already gone. My camera showed a partial face, a man in his 20s wearing the same hoodie I saw at the cemetery. I printed the photo and kept it hidden under my mattress. The next day, Megan came over again, pretending to check on me. She smiled too much, asked too many casual questions, like she was making sure I was still alive. I looked at her and realized the same smile she once used to win me over was now her weapon. I played along, laughed, and even offered her pie. But inside me, something cold was forming. I wasn't the same woman she thought I was. I had seen the darkness she carried, and now I was ready to face it. I promised myself before she walked out that door, this time it wouldn't be me crying. That night, I called an old friend, Martha, who used to work as a journalist in Denver. She owed me a favor from years back. I told her I needed help tracing a social media account without alerting the owner. She didn't ask too many questions. She just said, "Give me a few days." I hung up and finally felt a small spark of power return to me. I looked around my quiet home, the same place where Megan had tried to bury me in silence, and whispered to myself, "You wanted a ghost, now you'll get one." 2 days passed before Martha called me back. Her voice was quiet, but serious as whispered. But serious is quiet, but Tarko for Martha called me back. Her voice was quiet, but serious is quiet, but serious is Purcell. She wanted to ghost down that quiet coast est and nan. Persteruck and with serious is quiet, but serious is Purcell. She said, "Grace, whoever is behind that account is smarter than we thought. The IP address was hidden through multiple servers, but one trace led to a local connection registered under your son's company." I froze. My son's company. It couldn't be. Martha said it might not be him directly, but someone who has access to his office. My stomach twisted because Megan worked there too. I thanked Martha and sat in silence, staring at the wall. How far would she go? Why was she doing this? I had given her everything, my trust, my family, even my home when she and my son couldn't afford rent. I closed my eyes and felt my chest tighten. I remembered the nights she would sit beside me, talking about dreams and motherhood, pretending to care. But now I saw it clearly. She never wanted a mother. She wanted control. That evening, I went to my son's office building, pretending to bring lunch like old times. I smiled at the receptionist and walked through the glass doors. My son wasn't there. Receptionist walked the first me, pretending to bring lunch like old times. I smiled at the receptionist walk the first me, pretending to bring lunch. Only Megan sitting at her desk, scrolling through her phone. She looked surprised to see me. Her smile was quick but empty. I said I was just passing by and thought I'd say hello. She nodded and said, "Sure, Mom, sit down," her tone sharp on the word mom, like it hurt her tongue to say it. I looked around the office. The walls were filled with family pictures of other employees, but not one of her and my son together. That told me more than any words could. Something was wrong. I excused myself and walked toward the conference room, pretending to look for the restroom. My eyes scanned every desk until I saw it, a small black camera near the corner, pointed toward the entrance, the same model as the one in my living room photo. My heart began to race. I picked up a file to act casual and slipped a small USB stick from my pocket into the side of her computer, something Martha had given me, a program that copied files silently. I left before she could suspect anything. Martha had given me a program that copied files silently, and on the drive home, I prayed I would find what I needed. That night, I plugged the USB into my laptop, the screen filled with folders named random letters. One of them caught my eye. It said memory box. I opened it. Inside were hundreds of photos, every one of me. From birthdays to grocery trips to evenings sitting on the porch. Someone had been recording me for months. Some photos even had captions, "Old witch still alive, she needs to go." And another that read countdown day 10. My eyes filled with tears, but my hands didn't shake this time. I kept scrolling until I found a video file. When I clicked play, I saw Megan sitting on her couch talking to someone off camera. She said she doesn't even know what's coming. By the time they find out, it'll be too late. The man's voice replied, "We should post the final video soon, maybe on the anniversary." It was only 3 days away, the anniversary. It was only 3 days away. The day my husband had died, the day she knew I always spent alone. That was her plan, to fake my death on the same day I mourned his, to make it look like I couldn't live without him. I felt rage burn through me, slow and deep, but I didn't break. I whispered to the empty room, "Not this time, Megan, and not this time." The next morning, I drove to the police station, but turned back halfway. I realized if I gave them the files, now she would twist it like she always did. She had charmed tears and lies that people believed. I needed her to expose herself in front of everyone, so I decided to let her finish her plan, but on my terms, more sembled than Betty, someone time. So I decided to let her finish her plan, but on my terms. I told Dad. I called my son and said I wanted to have a small dinner on the anniversary to honor his father. He agreed and said Megan would come too. I smiled because that was exactly what I wanted. The stage was set. For the next 2 days, I prepared silently. I printed the photos from her computer and placed them inside a plain envelope. I made copies of the video and saved one on a flash drive hidden inside my necklace, the one my husband had given me. That evening, I baked Megan's favorite pie, not out of love, but out of strategy. I needed her calm, unsuspecting, and off guard. I set the table just like old times with candles and soft music. The smell of cinnamon filled the room, and it almost felt peaceful until I remembered what was about to happen. When they arrived, Megan hugged me first, acting like nothing had ever happened. I smiled back. My son looked tired and distracted. Maybe because of the tension between us, we sat for dinner and talked about small things, the weather, his work for dinner. Then I looked at Megan and said softly, "I have a surprise for you." Her eyes brightened for a second. Maybe thinking it was a gift, I stood up and turned on the television where my laptop was connected. The screen lit up, showing a paused video. I pressed play. Her smile disappeared. The room went silent except for her own voice filling the air, saying she doesn't even know what's coming. My son looked at her in shock. She tried to stand up, but I said, "Sit down, Megan." My voice calm but sharp. I told my son I had found her files, her fake account, her messages with that man. Everything. He turned pale and looked at her with disbelief. She started crying, saying it was just a joke, a mistake. But the video kept playing, showing her handing money to the man. I stopped it and said, "This isn't a joke. It's cruelty." My son stood up and walked out of the room without saying a word. She followed him, screaming his name, less in a show, and walked out of the room without saying a word. She followed him, screaming his name. And I stood there watching her world crumble the way she tried to break mine. When they left, I sat down on the couch, the same spot where I used to cry alone, but this time I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. I opened the window and let the cold night air fill the room. The stars looked brighter than they had in years. I whispered to the sky, "Thank you for giving me strength." And as I watched their car disappear down the road, I knew this was only the beginning. She thought she could bury me, but she had only taught me how to rise. The next morning, the house was quiet, but not empty. It was filled with something new. A strange calm that comes after a storm. I sat with my coffee, watching the sunlight crawl across the living room floor. I thought about what happened last night. Megan's face when she saw the video, her trembling hands, the way my son couldn't even look at her. I should have felt relief, but what I felt was unfinished. And justice had only started, not ended, because she still had her lies, and people still believed she was innocent. I couldn't let that be. She needed to face the truth in front of everyone she had fooled. Later that day, my son came alone. His eyes were red, his voice tired. He said, "Mom, I don't know what to think. She swears it was some prank." And I said, "Son, do you really believe that?" He looked away and said, "I don't know." I told him the truth doesn't need belief. It stands on its own. He left without another word. I watched his car fade into the street and felt my heart ache, not for Megan, but for the damage she had done to him. Felt my heart ache, not a, "You'll see who she really is." That evening, I called Martha again and told her I needed one last favor. She laughed softly and said, "You become quite the investigator, Grace." I said, "No, Martha, I just learned how to survive." I told her I wanted to leak the video anonymously to a few local pages, ones that shared community news. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Are you sure once this is out there, it can't be taken back?" I looked at the wall where my husband's photo hung and said, "Yes, I'm sure." She said, "Consider it done." Within an hour, the video was online, not my voice, not my name, just the proof, Megan's words and her plan for me. It spread fast. By nightfall, it had reached hundreds of people. Megan's words and her plan for me. It spread fast. By night, source to come print. And the comments began to pour in, some in disbelief, others furious, saying, "How could anyone do this to their own family?" I sat there in the dark watching it unfold, not with pride, but with justice, like a wound slowly being cleaned. The next morning, Megan showed up banging on my door, her eyes swollen, her hair messy. She shouted, "What did you do? You ruined me." I opened the door slowly and said, "No, Megan, you ruined yourself." She tried to push past me, but I stood firm. I told her I forgave her, but forgiveness doesn't erase truth. It exposes it. She screamed and threw the pie dish from the table. It shattered against the wall. It shattered against the wall. I 12 and knowing that. And for a moment, we both just stood there breathing hard. Then she whispered, "You'll regret this." And I said, "No, my dear, you already do." She left slamming the door behind her, and I felt the air grow lighter. I picked up the broken pieces and smiled, not because I enjoyed her pain, but because I finally reclaimed my peace. Over the next few days, people began to talk. Her friends stopped answering her calls. The company suspended her for misconduct, and my son moved out of their house to stay with a friend. He called me once saying he needed time to think. I said, "Take all the time you need." He sounded broken, but maybe this was the only way for him to see the truth. That weekend, I visited my husband's grave for the first time in months. The air was cold, but still, I sat beside his stone and whispered everything that had happened, the lies, the cruelty, the revenge. I told him I wished he were here to hold my hand, but maybe he already was. I felt a small breeze brush my cheek and I smiled. I said, "Don't worry, love. I'm fine now," stronger than ever. Then I stood up and looked toward the horizon, thinking maybe peace had finally come. But deep down, I knew this story wasn't over because people like Megan don't disappear quietly. They return when you least expect them. To maybe peace had finally come in to rush to. That night, my phone buzzed, was an unknown number. I answered without thinking and heard a man's voice say, "You shouldn't have done that." My blood ran cold. I said, "Who is this?" But the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, trying to steady my breath. I remembered the man from the cemetery, the one Megan had paid. Maybe he wasn't finished. Maybe she had called him again. I checked my doors, my windows, everything was locked. I sat by the window holding my husband's photo and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore. I faced worse than fear." I turned off the lights and waited. Everything in Bada, I faced worse than fear. I turned off the lights. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock, each sound echoing like a warning. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, watching the shadows move across the walls until the sun finally rose, and I knew the next chapter of the story was just beginning. The next morning, the sunlight felt different, colder somehow. Like even the day knew something was coming. I made my coffee, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The voice from the night before kept echoing in my head. "You shouldn't have done that." I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was some prank. Maybe someone just wanted to scare me. But deep down, I knew it was him. And now we're at Justin Tuv, the man from the cemetery, the one Megan had paid. I went to the front porch and found something lying near the door, a white envelope sealed with no name. I bent down slowly, picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed me sleeping in my bed. The picture was taken from inside my room. My knees went weak. I sat down on the porch step and something lying near room. My knees went weak, trying to breathe. Someone had been inside my house again. I looked around the yard. Everything looked normal, but I could feel it. I wasn't alone. Someone was watching, maybe from the trees, maybe from the street. I stood up and went inside, locking every door, every window. Then I sat in the corner of my living room, clutching my phone, trying to decide what to do next. Calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I tell them? That someone was haunting me with photos and whispers. I had already been through enough. I didn't want to be treated like an old woman imagining things. Later that afternoon, I drove to the small hardware store by the highway and bought a new security system, cameras, motion sensors, everything I could afford. The young man at the counter offered to help install them, but I said, "No, thank you. I needed to do this myself." So everything I needed to do this myself there. When I got home, I spent hours setting them up, one near the back door, one in the hallway, another facing the garden. I even installed one in my bedroom, pointing toward the window. By the time I finished, the sun had already set. I felt safer knowing the cameras were watching, even if I couldn't know. I sat down with my laptop to check the feeds. Everything was quiet, peaceful even, but my chest stayed tight, waiting for something. Around midnight, I heard a soft noise outside, like a footstep on gravel. I froze, staring at the screen. One of the cameras flickered for a moment. Then I saw movement near the garden, a shadow tall and thin, rounding their efficient sanded and the cameras. Walking slowly toward the back porch, my heart raced. I zoomed in. The man was wearing the same black hoodie. I couldn't see his face, just the glint of something metallic in his hand. I dialed 911, but before I could speak, the lights went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. I sat there gripping the phone, whispering, please hurry, please hurry. The operator kept asking if I was safe. I said, no, someone is here. I heard footsteps on the porch, then silence, pure heavy silence that lasted forever. And then a knock, soft at first, then harder. 3 times I whispered, go away, but the knocking grew louder until it stopped. Moments later, red and blue lights filled the windows. The police arrived. They searched the yard, but found no one, only footprints in the mud leading toward the woods behind the house. One officer said it might be a prank, maybe teenagers. I wanted to believe him, but the photo in the envelope said otherwise. This wasn't a prank. This was personal, maybe to a test. After they left, I sat in my chair, unable to sleep. The darkness outside felt alive. I watched the screen showing all 4 camera angles, everything quiet again. At 3 a.m, I saw my phone light up with a message from an unknown number. It said, you think you've won, but she's not done. I stared at it for minutes before deleting it. I knew exactly who it meant, but she said, you think you've won, but she said done. I stared at it for minutes before deleting it. I knew exactly who it meant. But she said, you think you've won, 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 but she said, you think you've won. Megan, even if she didn't send the message herself, it came from her circle. The man she hired was still protecting her. Maybe she had promised him something, or maybe he had his own reason to keep this going. Either way, I realized this was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. She had started a game that I now had to finish. The next day, I drove to Martha's apartment in Denver. I needed to tell someone everything before it was too late. She opened the door and gasped when she saw me. She said, Grace, you look pale. What happened? I told her about the envelope, the photo, the message, everything. She listened quietly. She looked quietly. I tab polited. I was tail did I banned. I take a dro NTS. Then said, you need to disappear for a while, stay with me, or go somewhere safe. But I shook my head. I said, no, Martha, if I run now, she wins, and I'm too old to start hiding. She sighed and said, then let me help. She handed me a small voice recorder and said, if anything happens, keep this with you. It records everything automatically. I hugged her and said, thank you, needed, in small voice recorder. And said, thank you, needed, in small voice recorder. And said, thank you, and disappear. She whispered, be careful, Grace. People like that don't stop until someone makes them. That night I returned home. The road felt longer than usual, empty and silent. The house looked cold from the outside. When I stepped in, I noticed something odd. The air smelled faintly of Megan's perfume, sweet but sharp. I looked around carefully. Nothing seemed moved, but I could feel her presence, like she had been here recently. I checked the footage from the cameras and stopped when I saw her, Megan, standing on my porch earlier that day, holding something small in her hands. She stayed there for almost a minute, then left to lecture. Meth IB. I rewound the footage and zoomed in. She had placed a small box near the door. I ran outside and looked where she had stood. Hidden under a plant was a tiny silver box. I picked it up carefully and took it inside. Opening it slowly, inside was a small flash drive, no note, nothing else. I plugged it into my laptop and waited. A single video appeared. I pressed play, and there she was, Megan, sitting in her car, tears on her cheeks, saying, I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted you to leave us alone. But now I can't stop it. They won't let me. Please forgive me if you can. The screen went black. My chest tightened. Who were they? I sat frozen, staring at the dark screen, realizing this had gone beyond jealousy or revenge. There was someone else behind her, someone she feared more than she hated me. And now that person had turned their eyes toward me. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock in my living room. Every sound felt louder. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. My mind would not stop racing. I kept thinking about the day in court, about the look on Sarah's face when the judge asked her why she made that fake account. She did not even blink. She lied so easily, said she had nothing to do with it, said maybe someone hacked her, said maybe I was confused. I wanted to stand up and scream, but I stayed quiet. The lawyer whispered to me to keep calm, that the truth would speak louder than anger, but I felt like my truth had been buried under layers of her lies and charm. She smiled at the judge like she was the victim, the woman who lost her mother in law and was now being accused unfairly. I had seen that look before on her face when she wanted something. She knew how to twist emotions and make herself look innocent. That night, as the rain tapped against the window, I realized I needed more than just the court to expose her. I needed to break her mask from the inside. The next morning, I went to my garden. I took a deep breath and started writing everything down, every little thing she had done from the first day she entered my home to the day she made that account, the way she used my son against me, the way she slowly took over every corner of my life. I was not just writing a story, I was creating evidence. I had spent years staying quiet. Now I was going to speak in a way she could never silence. I created a small group online called Unseen Truths. It was a place for women like me, older women who had been hurt, betrayed, or erased by their families. I used a different name, Grace L., not my full name, just enough to sound ordinary and safe. At first, I shared other women's stories, but then one day I posted my own, a short piece that started with the same line she had used on that fake account. Rest in peace, mother-in-law. But my version told the truth. It told of a woman who was alive, forgotten, and watching. I did not use names, but every detail was true. The town, the house, the pattern of betrayal, the way a daughter-in-law built her reputation on her lies. Within days, the post went viral. Women from all over started sharing it, saying it felt like their own lives, hidden under fake smiles and polite dinners. I watched silently as the truth started spreading like fire. And then something unexpected happened. One morning, Sarah called. She never called me unless she wanted something. Her voice was shaking. She asked, "Have you seen what people are saying online?" I said, "No." "Why?" She said, "Someone wrote about a woman like us, and now people think it is me." I could almost hear her panic through the phone. I said, "Oh, really? What makes them think that?" She said, "The details, the house, the way it is written. It feels personal." I laughed softly and said, "Well, maybe the world is smaller than we think." After that day, she could not sleep. I knew because I heard her pacing at night. She deleted her social accounts one by one and started whispering to her friends that someone was after her. Her own lies were haunting her in the exact way she wanted mine to. I did not need to raise my voice or fight anymore. I just let her drown in the storm she created. My son began noticing her strange behavior. One evening, he asked me if I thought Sarah was okay. I said, maybe guilt has a way of making people sick. He looked confused but said nothing. A few days later, he found messages in her phone. She had been messaging someone, begging them to remove a post from a forum, offering money. I did not even have to lift a finger anymore. Her own fear was my revenge. Each night I sat by my window, watching the rain fall, thinking how life gives us strange justice. Sometimes it does not come with anger or shouting. It comes with silence that makes the guilty hear their own heartbeat louder than anything. One day she came to me, eyes red and tired. She said, "Grace, if I ever hurt you, I am sorry." I wanted to laugh, but instead I smiled and said, "It is all right. We all make mistakes." I could see she wanted forgiveness, but what she really wanted was peace. And I was not ready to give her that, not yet, because some lessons take longer to learn. I turned back to my garden, pretending to tend the flowers while she stood behind me, waiting for words that never came. That silence broke her more than any curse could. I had become her ghost. not the one she killed online, but the one that now lived in her mind. And every time she closed her eyes, she heard me. After that day, Sarah changed completely. She stopped laughing, stopped meeting people, and barely spoke to my son. She spent hours locked in her room, staring at her phone as if waiting for something to disappear. But the internet never forgets. Once a story goes out, it finds its way back in whispers, in comments, in the dark corners of online groups. I watched her lose sleep over the same lies she once used to destroy me. I had not planned to take it this far, but life had a strange way of teaching justice. It never knocked softly. It came crashing like a storm. One night, my son came home late, his face pale. He said, "Mom, something strange happened at work. Someone sent me a message saying your wife is trending online." I kept my calm and asked, "What for?" He said, "It is about a story that went viral last week. People think it is about Sarah." I looked at her. She is being called manipulative and cruel, and they have screenshots of her old posts. My heart almost smiled, but my face stayed still. I told him the truth always finds its way home. He sat down quietly and said, "I do not know what to believe anymore." That night, when he went to bed, I walked outside. The air was cool, the sky heavy with clouds. I looked up and whispered, "Sometimes silence can scream louder than any voice." And tonight it was screaming for me. The next morning, Sarah came to me, her hands trembling. She said, "Grace, please make it stop. People are messaging me, calling me names." Why? Someone even sent me a picture of our house saying they know where I live. I looked at her for a long moment and said, "But I thought you liked attention. You seemed to enjoy it when it was my face on that fake account." Her eyes filled with tears. She said, "I made a mistake. I just wanted people to think you were gone so I could have peace. You never let me feel at home here." I said, "You wanted peace, so you gave me death online, and now you see what that kind of peace feels like." She started crying, and for the first time, I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. I told her, peace is something you earn by doing right, not by erasing others. Her world was falling apart. She could not go out without people whispering behind her back. She lost her job because someone sent screenshots to her boss saying she bullied her mother-in-law online. I did not do it, but the truth has a way of traveling without help. One evening, my son came to me again. He said, "Mom, I think Sarah needs help. She is not eating. She keeps saying someone is watching her." I said, "Maybe she finally understands what it feels like to be haunted by lies." He looked sad and said, "I do not know what to do. I love her, but I also see what she has done." I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, sometimes love means letting people face the reflection of their own choices." A few days later, Sarah left the house. She said she needed space. I did not stop her. She went to stay with her sister in another city. Weeks passed with no word, and for the first time in years, my house felt calm again. I started reading, painting, even planted roses near the porch. Life began to breathe again, but peace never lasts long when the past still has roots. One afternoon, my neighbor knocked on my door. She said, "Grace, there is someone outside asking for you." I walked out and saw a woman standing by the fence, thin, pale, wearing sunglasses. When she removed them, I realized it was Sarah. She looked completely different, like the world had drained all her color. She said, "I came to say thank you." I asked, "For what?" She said, "For teaching me what it feels like to live in the shadow of your own lies. I wanted to destroy you, but instead I destroyed myself." I stood there quietly, the wind blowing between us. She said, "I am leaving for good. I need to start over somewhere far where no one knows my name." I nodded and said, "I hope you find the peace you once stole from me." She smiled weakly. turned around and walked away. I watched her go down the street, disappearing into the fog. That was the last time I saw her. Months later, my son told me she had moved to Seattle, started therapy, and cut all contact with the past. He said, maybe it is better that way. I said, maybe it is. Maybe some stories are not meant to have happy endings. They are meant to have lessons. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun fade behind the trees, I felt something I had not felt in years: forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. For all the times I let others define my worth. I whispered to the wind, I am still here, I am alive, and finally free. And somewhere deep inside, I hoped that Sarah heard it too. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not revenge at all. It is peace that the guilty can never find. Weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a strange calm. The house no longer echoed with arguments or tension. The air felt lighter. I started volunteering at the community library in town. It gave me purpose and kept my mind busy. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking about Sarah, wondering if she was still in Seattle, if she had really changed, or if her guilt still followed her like a shadow. But I always pushed those thoughts away. One cold evening, as I was leaving the library, I saw a car parked across the street. The driver window rolled down, and for a split second, I thought I saw her face. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe ghosts do not always stay far away. When I reached home, there was an envelope on my porch with no name. I opened it and found a letter inside. It said, "Thank you for setting me free. You were right. I needed to face myself. I am working in a small cafe now, learning to breathe again. I hope one day you forgive me." I sat down holding that letter and felt a strange mix of peace and sadness. Forgiveness was never easy, but in that moment, I realized it was not about her anymore. It was about me letting go of a story that had lived inside my heart for too long. The next morning, I placed the letter in a box where I kept memories that hurt but taught me something. I closed it and promised myself to live forward, not backward. Weeks later, my son came home one weekend. He looked tired, but happy. He said, "Mom, I visited Sarah. She seems better now. She is working hard and wants to say sorry." I told him I had already received her letter, and that was enough. He smiled and said, "She still talks about you. She says you made her realize what love really means." I looked at him and said, "Maybe love is not about saving people. It is about letting them see themselves clearly for the first time." He nodded quietly and hugged me. That night, I sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside, the white flakes covering the garden where I once buried my pain. I thought about all the years I spent trying to please others, to be the perfect mother, the quiet wife, the forgiving woman. And then I realized something powerful. I had found strength in my silence, but peace in my truth. The next day, I visited the local church, not for prayer, but to light a candle for myself, for the woman who survived lies, humiliation, and loneliness, and still managed to keep her heart kind. When I walked outside, I met an old friend. She told me people in town were talking about my story, that someone had written about it anonymously on a blog called The Voice of the Forgotten. I smiled because I knew it was the same online group I had once created under a fake name. It had grown bigger than I imagined, helping women tell their truths without fear. I felt proud that something born from my pain had become hope for others. Later that night, I received another message from an unknown number. It said, "Grace, I saw your post years ago and it saved me. Thank you." I sat in silence, tears in my eyes, realizing how full circle life had come. The lie that once tried to bury me had turned into a truth that healed others. Maybe that was God's way of showing me that revenge does not always destroy. Sometimes it rebuilds slowly, quietly, beautifully. As I looked out the window, the moonlight touched the roses I had planted months ago. They had bloomed perfectly, soft pink, glowing in the dark. I whispered to the night, I forgive you, Sarah, and I forgive myself, because holding on to hate is a heavier prison than any pain someone else can give me. The world felt lighter, the air smelled like spring, and for the first time in many years, I truly felt free. That night, I could not sleep. The image of Megan crying on the floor kept flashing in my mind, but this time my heart did not ache for her. It felt like justice had finally begun. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat near the window. The sun was slow rising over the hills, and the air smelled like peace, but deep down, I knew it was not over yet. Megan had disappeared from the house. Her things were gone, and she had left no note. The silence felt heavy, like a storm waiting to return. I tried calling her number, but it went straight to voicemail. I informed Ethan, and he came over looking worried. I could see in his eyes that he was torn between anger and guilt. He asked me if I had said anything harsh to her. I told him no, I just told her the truth. He nodded quietly and sat there for a long time. Then he said, maybe she needs time alone. I said, maybe, but inside I knew it was something else. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. It said, you thought you won grace, but you just lit the fire. I felt a chill run through me. I showed the message to Ethan and he turned pale. We went to the police and filed a report, but they said it could be a prank. I knew it was not. Megan had always been dramatic, but this was different. There was something darker in her silence. That night, I checked the fake account again. It had been updated. There was a new post with my old photo, and the caption said, gone, but not forgotten. The comments were full of strangers saying, rest easy, Grace. I realized she was still trying to destroy me, but this time from the shadows, I decided to act quietly. I reached out to a friend named Helen who worked with digital crimes. She was an old classmate from years back, and she agreed to help. She traced the IP address of the account and confirmed it was being used near a small motel outside of town. I went there the next morning alone. The motel looked abandoned and cold. When I entered, the manager recognized Megan from a photo. He said she stayed there for a few days and left 2 nights ago, but she was not alone. She was with a man, tall, dark hair, maybe in his 30s. My heart froze. I realized Megan had found someone to help her. Maybe she was planning something worse. I went back home, locked the doors, and stayed alert. That night, I heard noises in the backyard, faint steps crunching on the leaves. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out slowly. The air was heavy and still. I pointed the light near the shed and saw movement. A shadow slipped behind the fence. I ran inside, called Ethan. He arrived with the police, but whoever it was had already gone. The next morning, I found footprints near the window, muddy prints leading to the back door. The police said to stay with family, but I refused. This was my home, and I would not be scared away. The next evening, I received another message. It said, she took everything from me. Now I will take her peace too. I knew it was Megan, and I knew the storm was coming. I sat in the living room, lights off, waiting. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. I was not afraid anymore because I finally understood that some wars are not fought with weapons. They are fought with truth and endurance. When the doorbell rang at midnight, I did not move. I waited. The bell rang again, louder, then silence. I stood up slowly and walked toward the door. When I opened it, there was no one there, only a small box on the porch. I picked it up and took it inside. The box had a small camera inside it, the same model as the one I found months ago. with a note that said, "You should have stayed quiet, Grace." I realized Megan had been recording me again, maybe from the woods or somewhere close. I checked around the house, found another small hidden camera near the porch light. I took it down and smashed it to pieces. The rage inside me had turned into strength. I called Helen again and asked her to trace any new uploads. She called back and said there was a new live stream running under a different name. We opened it together and saw Megan sitting in a dark room talking to the camera, saying she would expose my lies to the world. Her voice cracked, her eyes looked wild. I watched in silence as she fell apart, live for strangers to see. The world began to see her truth, not mine. Helen called the authorities. They tracked her location and found her that night. The police said she was safe, but under observation. I sat in the quiet afterward, feeling nothing but an empty calm, the kind that comes when the storm is finally past, or maybe when it is about to return. The morning after Megan was taken into custody, the world outside felt quiet. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth, and for the first time in years, I could hear the sound of my own breath without fear. Ethan came to see me, his eyes red from sleepless nights. I said, "Mom, I do not know how to thank you for holding this family together." I smiled faintly and said, "Son, sometimes love does not mean saving people. It means showing them the mirror even when it hurts." He hugged me tight and I could feel the weight lifting off both our hearts. I spent that day cleaning the house, opening the curtains, letting sunlight in. It felt like a fresh start, not just for me, but for every wound I had hidden in the shadows. Later that evening, I walked into the backyard, the same place where I had once buried my pain. The roses I planted months ago had bloomed again, softer, fuller, brighter. I stood there for a long moment and whispered, "Megan, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The wind blew gently, brushing through my hair, almost like the world was listening. I went inside, made tea, and sat by the window watching the sky turn orange and pink. There was a stillness in my soul that I had never known before. I realized my revenge was never about destroying her. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my truth, my strength. Weeks passed and life found its rhythm again. I started volunteering at the women's shelter downtown, helping others who had been hurt by those they trusted most. Every story I heard reminded me of my own pain, but it also reminded me how far I had come. One day, a young woman came to me crying, saying she had seen my story online and it gave her courage to leave a toxic marriage. I held her hands and said, "Sometimes the end you fear is the beginning you need." That night, I sat by my desk and began writing my story in a journal, not to relive it, but to release it. Months later, I got a letter from the hospital. It was from Megan. She wrote, "I am sorry for everything. I never wanted it to go this far. I hope one day you find peace, and I hope I do too." I read it twice, folded it, and placed it inside the same box that once held her fake photos of me. Then I locked it and put it away for good, because some chapters do not need to be reopened. They just need to be remembered for what they taught you. That night, I lit a candle in my room. Its flame flickered softly, dancing with the shadows. I whispered to myself, "Grace, you made it. You survived the betrayal, the lies, the pain, and came out stronger than ever." I looked at my reflection in the window, and for the first time, I saw not the woman who was hurt, but the woman who healed herself. I smiled, took a deep breath, and felt gratitude fill my heart. And to all my dear friends watching, thank you for staying with me through this story. If my journey touched your heart, then let it remind you that revenge does not always come with anger. Sometimes it comes with peace, with the quiet power of letting go. If you have ever been broken by someone you trusted, remember this: you can rise again. You can rebuild your life. one truth at a time. So do not forget to subscribe, share your story in the comments, and join me in the next video, because every voice deserves to be heard and every wound deserves its healing. This is Grace, and this was my story.